Welcome. The real question is not which async syntax you use, but what changes when work moves out of the immediate path and into later execution. Now that we have framed the pressure, we can compare how Node.js, Java, Go, and Python each push failure toward evidence and design choices.
So the language feature is not the point by itself?
Exactly. The point is how each model changes timing, state visibility, and the proof you need to trust the system. The async boundary is where the hidden assumption starts to matter. Submission is not completion, and the later worker may see different state than the caller expected.
Is the main risk just delay?
Delay is one risk, but the deeper issue is uncertainty about ordering, retries, and whether the same work will happen once or more than once. Node.js makes non-blocking execution feel simple, but the event loop still creates pressure on object state when callbacks or async functions resume later.
So even without threads, we can still get stale state or duplicate work?
Yes, single-threaded does not mean pressure-free. It means the invariant has to survive deferral instead of true parallelism. Java makes the pressure more visible through threads, futures, and completion timing, where shared state and visibility become the real design problem.
Isn't a future enough to prove the task finished correctly?
Only if the state it depends on was protected. A future proves completion of a task, not that the surrounding workflow preserved the invariant. Go's Go routines and channels make concurrency lightweight, but lightweight communication does not eliminate the difference between delivery and effect.
So a channel send is not the same as the side effect happening.
Right. The channel tells you the event moved. It does not guarantee the operation happened once, or that retries will remain harmless. Python, async, follows the same general pattern as Node.js. Work pauses at await boundaries and resumes later, so state and ordering must be defended explicitly.
Then why do people treat it like ordinary sequential code?
Because the syntax is familiar. But the execution model still allows the same pressure. Resumed work may observe a changed world. Now we can make the failure concrete. A worker ships an order, crashes before acknowledgement, and the queue redelivers the same event.
Why did the baseline look correct if that can happen?
Because the baseline assumed one delivery, one execution, and one ACK. Under pressure, those are separate events, and that assumption breaks. The correction is to protect the invariant directly. Use idempotency keys, durable completion records, and retry-safe handlers so duplicate delivery does not become duplicate side effect.
Isn't adding that control always the best choice?
Not always. It is safer for this failure, but it costs storage, state management, and more handler complexity. The comparison starts with two stacks that look different but can hide the same assumption, that work happens once, in order, and against current state.
So the stack choice is less important than the pressure it introduces.
Exactly. We compare stacks by the failure they can produce and the evidence needed to trust them. Surface syntax can be misleading here. Await, .get, and .then accept may express similar intent, but they sit in different execution models with different pressure points.
So similar code can still fail differently?
Yes, and that difference matters when you are collecting evidence or defending a design decision. The naive model assumes the operation happens once, the state is current, and the order is guaranteed. That is why the sequential test passes.
Then what hidden assumption usually makes it look safe?
Timing. Nothing delayed the work, nothing retried it, and nothing else changed the state first. A better design starts by naming the invariant, then exposing the transition, and only then choosing a control such as idempotency, version checks, or coordination.
Why start with the invariant instead of the mechanism?
Because the mechanism is only justified if we know what property it protects. This is why the evidence matters. Queue delivery IDs, idempotency records, worker logs, and the side effect audit trail are what let us defend the claim.
What would I record if the worker succeeded but the acknowledgement was lost?
Exactly that ambiguity. The evidence has to show whether the work was applied once, applied twice, or left unresolved. Here, the interleaving is the failure. Worker A ships the order, crashes before ACK, and worker B receives the same event again.
So the bug is really the assumption that delivery count equals execution count?
Yes, that assumption is exactly what the interleaving breaks, and that is why we force it in a repeatable test. The state machine makes the invariant explicit. Each external side effect for an order event is applied at most once, even if delivery happens more than once.
Why include retry_petty w instead of pretending the workflow is linear?
Because failure is part of the real execution model. If we do not model it, we cannot defend the design under pressure. These anti-patterns are all versions of the same mistake. The demo is treated as proof, the tool is treated as the property, or the evidence is too vague to reconstruct what happened.
So the correction is to keep the baseline and then stress the invariant?
Exactly. Preserve the happy path, add pressure, and make the artifact specific enough that another reviewer can verify the failure. Another common mistake is naming a tool but not the design property it protects. That happens when students focus on frameworks before invariants.
So the fix is to identify the invariant first.
Yes, write the invariant first, then select the mechanism that protects it. A second failure mode is evidence that is too vague to support the claim. Logs without operation IDs or state transitions leave reviewers unable to reconstruct the failure.
So the evidence has to be specific enough to replay the failure.
Exactly. Capture structured evidence and link it directly to the claim. The trade-off table is not asking for a universal best answer. It is showing that each approach buys safety in one place and adds cost somewhere else.
Which one should I choose first?
Choose the one that protects the invariant your system actually needs, then defend the cost that comes with it. So the next question is how you turn this into a defensible artifact. Identify the invariant, write a success case, write a pressure case, and add operation IDs before you run it.
What evidence goes into the integrity packet?
The assumption, the logs, the before and after behavior, the validation result, and any remaining risk. This is where the lecture turns into A3 practice. Show the relevant workflow in your own domain, then defend the design with runnable commands, logs, diagrams, and failure reproduction.
So code alone is not enough?
Right. You have to explain the async behavior, prove the failure or the fix, and justify the decision in the integrity packet. These questions are the defense checklist: invariant, hidden assumption, repeatable failure, evidence, mechanism, trade-off, and how the issue differs across your stacks.
What is the main thing the interviewer is really checking?
Whether you can reason from pressure to evidence to design choice without hand-waving. The core insight is simple. Async models across languages are different ways that execution pressure exposes hidden assumptions.
And the mature response is to make the system explainable under that pressure?
Exactly. A mature design can be stressed, repaired, and validated with evidence. For deeper practice, focus on structured logging, correlation IDs, invariants in stateful systems, and message queues with item potency and event ordering.
Should I treat those as background reading or as part of the assignment work?
Both if you want stronger A3 reasoning. They give you the language and the evidence patterns to defend a real async design.